The rain came down in silver sheets the night Eleanor Gray stood before the pawnbroker's window, her mother's sapphire necklace clutched in her trembling hand. The gas lamps flickered along the narrow London street, casting shadows that seemed to judge her, and she pulled her worn cloak tighter against the cold. The necklace was the last beautiful thing she owned, the only piece of her mother that had survived the fire that took their home, their fortune, and her father's will to live. But beauty could not fill empty stomachs. Beauty could not silence the cries of children sleeping in doorways 3 streets over, their hollow eyes haunting her every waking moment. She pushed open the shop door. The bell chimed, sharp and accusing. Inside, the air smelled of old leather and desperation. The pawnbroker, a thin man with spectacles perched on a hawkish nose, looked up from his ledger. His gaze moved to the necklace in her hand, and something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, or recognition. Eleanor did not notice. She could only hear the echo of little Meg's cough, the rattle in that 6-year-old chest that worsened every night in the cold. "How much?" Eleanor asked, her voice steadier than her heart. The pawnbroker reached for the necklace, turning it slowly beneath the lamp. The sapphires caught the light, deep as midnight, ringed with tiny diamonds that whispered of ballrooms and laughter and a world Eleanor barely remembered. Her throat tightened. She forced herself to breathe. £50, the man said. 50? Eleanor's voice cracked. It is worth 10 times that. To someone, perhaps, but not to me. He set it down on the counter between them, indifferent. 50 or nothing at all. Eleanor closed her eyes. £50 could buy bread, coal, medicine. It could keep the children at St. Jude's Mission fed for 2 months. It could save lives. Her mother's face rose in her memory, soft and smiling, fastening the necklace around Eleanor's neck on her 16th birthday. "This was given to me by someone I loved," her mother had said. "One day you will understand its true worth." Eleanor opened her eyes. "I will take it." The pawnbroker counted out the notes, slow and deliberate. Eleanor took them, her fingers numb, and turned toward the door. She did not see the second man standing in the shadows near the back of the shop, his tall frame draped in a dark greatcoat, his grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that could have burned through stone. She did not see him step forward, just slightly, as if pulled by an invisible thread. She did not hear him murmur to the pawnbroker after she left, his voice low and commanding. She only felt the rain on her face as she hurried down the street, the banknotes pressed against her heart, and the hollow ache of loss blooming where the necklace used to rest. The Duke of Ashford stood in the rain long after Eleanor disappeared around the corner. His hand rested on the pawnbroker's counter, his fingers brushing the place where the sapphire necklace had lain moments before. He had recognized it instantly. How could he not? He had commissioned it himself, 23 years ago, for the woman he had loved in secret, the woman whose name he had never been permitted to speak aloud. Margaret Gray. She had been the daughter of a country vicar, bright and kind and entirely unsuitable for a duke. Society had made that abundantly clear. His father had made it clearer still, and so Ashford had given her the necklace in a moment of reckless hope, a single evening beneath the stars when he had dared to imagine a life beyond duty. She had worn it once, just once, and then she had vanished from London. He had searched for her, but his father's influence had closed every door. Years later, he learned she had married a merchant, a good man, and borne a daughter. And now that daughter stood in a pawnbroker's shop, selling the only link to her mother's past, her face drawn with exhaustion and determination. Ashford had not known Margaret had died. He had not known about the fire, the ruin, the poverty, but he saw it now in the threadbare cloak, the worn boots, the way Eleanor had held the necklace as if it might shatter in her hands. He turned to the pawnbroker. "I will buy it back. Your Grace, now, Ashford placed a stack of notes on the counter, far more than the necklace was worth, far more than £50. And I want to know where she went. The pawnbroker hesitated, then nodded slowly. St. Jude's Mission, Your Grace. She volunteers there, every day. Ashford took the necklace and slipped it into his coat pocket. The sapphires felt warm, as if they still carried Eleanor's touch. He stepped out into the rain, his mind already turning. He would go to St. Jude's. He would find her, and he would return what she had lost, though he suspected she would not make it easy. St. Jude's Mission was a crumbling building wedged between a tannery and a gin house, its walls stained with soot, its windows patched with rags. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of boiled cabbage and unwashed bodies, but also with something else, something softer, hope, perhaps, or simply the stubborn refusal to surrender. Eleanor moved through the narrow hall with a basket of bread on her arm, distributing rolls to the line of children who waited with wide eyes and outstretched hands. There was little Meg, her cough still rattling, but her smile bright when Eleanor slipped her an extra piece. There was Tom, the boy with the crooked leg, who helped sweep the floors. There was Mrs. Dawson, the widow who had lost 3 children to fever and now spent her days stirring soup for others. Eleanor did not notice the tall man who entered through the side door, his coat perfectly tailored, his presence so out of place that several children stopped mid-chew to stare. She was too busy kneeling beside Meg, pressing a hand to the girl's forehead, frowning at the heat she found there. "You need to rest," Eleanor murmured. "But I want to help," Meg whispered. "You help by getting well." Eleanor tucked a strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "Promise me." Meg nodded, her eyes drooping. Eleanor stood, her heart heavy, and turned toward the kitchen, only to collide with a solid wall of wool and muscle. She gasped, stumbling back, and strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her. She looked up and froze. The man before her was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the color of a winter storm. His face was striking, all sharp angles and quiet intensity, and he was looking at her as if she were the only person in the entire city. Eleanor's breath caught. She had never seen him before, she was certain, and yet something in his gaze felt familiar, as if he knew her, as if he had been searching for her. "Forgive me," he said, his voice low and smooth, edged with something she could not name. "I did not mean to startle you." Eleanor pulled back, suddenly aware of how close they stood, how his hands still lingered near her arms. She stepped away, smoothing her apron, her cheeks flushing. "You are lost, sir. This is not—" "I am not lost." His gaze did not waver. "I came to find you." Eleanor's heart skipped. "I do not understand." "My name is Adrian Harcourt," he said, and the name landed like a stone in still water. "The Duke of Ashford." The room seemed to tilt. "The Duke. Here." Eleanor's mind raced. She had heard of the Duke of Ashford, of course. Everyone had. He was one of the wealthiest men in England, a man of influence and power, a man who moved in circles so far above her own that they might as well have been stars, and he was standing in St. Jude's Mission, looking at her as if she mattered. "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended. "Because you sold something last night," Ashford said quietly. "Something that belonged to me." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. The necklace, her mother's necklace. She took a step back, her hands clenching into fists. "That necklace was my mother's. It was given to her by me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and true. Eleanor shook her head. "No. You are mistaken. My mother, Margaret Grey." Ashford's voice softened, and for a moment the ducal mask slipped, revealing something raw beneath. "I knew her. A long time ago." Eleanor's knees threatened to buckle. She pressed a hand to the wall, struggling to breathe. Her mother had never spoken of a duke. She had never spoken of anyone from her past in London. But Eleanor remembered the way her mother would sometimes touch the necklace with a distant, wistful expression, as if it carried a story too painful to tell. "I do not believe you," Eleanor whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. Ashford reached into his coat and withdrew the necklace. The sapphires gleamed in the dim light, familiar and impossible. Eleanor's breath hitched. "I bought it back," he said. "It belongs to you." "No." Eleanor's voice broke. "I sold it. I sold it to feed the children here, to buy medicine for Meg, to—" Her throat closed. She could not finish. Ashford stepped closer, holding out the necklace. "Then let me help you do that. Keep the necklace. Take the money I gave the pawnbroker. Use it for the mission. But do not give up the last piece of your mother." Eleanor stared at him, her vision blurring. "Why would you do this? You do not know me." "Because I knew her," Ashford said, and his voice was thick with old grief. "And I failed her once. I will not fail her daughter." Eleanor's hands shook as she reached for the necklace. The moment her fingers closed around it, the tears came, hot and sudden. She turned away, pressing the necklace to her chest, her shoulders trembling. Behind her, Ashford stood silent, his own hands clenched at his sides, as if it took every ounce of his will not to reach for her. "I do not need your charity," Eleanor said at last, her voice muffled. "It is not charity." Ashford's tone was firm. "It is a debt." Eleanor wiped her eyes and turned back to face him. "What debt could you possibly owe me?" "The one I owe your mother." Ashford's gaze held hers. "Let me repay it. Let me help St. Jude's. Let me—" He paused, searching for words. "Let me know her daughter." Eleanor wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to send him away, to protect herself from whatever this was. But she thought of Meg's fever, of the children sleeping on thin blankets, of Mrs. Dawson's tired eyes. She thought of the £50 that had already been spent, of the 100 more needs that would come tomorrow. "Very well," she said quietly, "but do not expect my gratitude." Ashford's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I would never presume." The days that followed were strange and disorienting. Ashford returned to St. Jude's every morning, his carriage drawing stares from the entire street. He brought funds, yes, enough to repair the roof, to buy blankets and medicine, to hire a proper cook. But he also brought himself. He rolled up his sleeves and helped carry crates. He sat with the children and listened to their stories. He spoke to Mrs. Dawson with a respect that made the old woman's eyes shine. And he watched Eleanor. She felt his gaze constantly, a weight that was neither uncomfortable nor entirely welcome. He asked her questions about the mission, about the families they served, about her own history. She answered curtly at first, determined to keep distance between them, but Ashford was patient. He did not press. He simply remained, steady and immovable, like a tree that had weathered 1,000 storms. One afternoon, Eleanor found him in the courtyard, teaching Tom how to whittle a piece of wood. The boy's laughter rang out, bright and clear, and Eleanor stopped in the doorway, her heart twisting. She had not heard Tom laugh in months. "You are good with him," she said. Ashford glanced up, his expression softening. "He reminds me of myself, once. I cannot imagine you as a child." "I was, believe it or not." Ashford set down the knife and stood, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Though I suspect I was less charming than Tom." Eleanor found herself smiling, just a little. "I doubt that." They stood in silence for a moment, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Then Ashford said, "Your mother used to laugh the way Tom does, as if the whole world were full of light." Eleanor's smile faded. You speak as if you loved her. I did. The confession came quietly, without hesitation, more than I had words for.
Eleanor's breath caught.
Then why did you let her go? Because I was a coward. Ashford's jaw tightened. Because I chose duty over love. Because I thought there would be time to find her again, and I was wrong. The pain in his voice was so raw that Eleanor felt it in her own chest. She looked away, blinking hard. She never spoke of you. I am not surprised. I imagine I was a wound she preferred to forget. No. The word came out before Eleanor could stop it. She met his gaze. She kept the necklace. She wore it on special days, when she thought no one was looking. That is not forgetting. Ashford's expression cracked, just for a moment, and Eleanor saw the man beneath the title, the man who had loved and lost and carried that loss like a stone in his chest. She felt an unexpected kinship with him, this stranger who was not quite a stranger, this duke who knelt in the dirt to teach a crippled boy how to carve. I think, Eleanor said softly, that she would have forgiven you. Ashford's eyes glistened. He looked away, his throat working. Thank you. Eleanor nodded and turned to go, but his voice stopped her. Eleanor. She looked back. Would you walk with me this evening? He asked. Just for a little while. I would like to tell you about her, if you would let me. Eleanor hesitated. Then she nodded. Very well. They walked along the Thames as the sun set, painting the water gold and crimson. Ashford spoke of Margaret, of the summer they had met, of her laughter and her kindness and the way she had seen the world as a place worth saving. Eleanor listened, her heart aching and full at once, learning about the mother she had thought she knew completely. She loved you fiercely, Ashford said at last. She spoke of you that last night we met. She said you would be strong and brave. She was right. Eleanor's throat tightened. I do not feel brave. You sold your most precious possession to save strangers, Ashford said. That is the very definition of bravery. They stopped at the edge of the embankment, the city sprawling behind them, the river flowing endlessly ahead. Eleanor turned to face him, and for the first time, she let herself truly look at him, not as a duke, not as a memory of her mother's past, but as a man who had come to find her, who had returned what she had lost, who had stayed. Why does it matter so much to you? She asked. Helping me. Helping St. Jude's. Ashford met her gaze, unflinching. Because when I look at you, I see her, and I see a chance to be the man I should have been. You cannot undo the past. No. Ashford's voice was quiet, but perhaps I can honor it. Something shifted in Eleanor's chest, a wall crumbling that she had not known she had built. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses and the scars, and then back at him. I do not know what you want from me. Nothing, Ashford said. Only the chance to know you, to be part of what you are building, to... He stopped, struggling. To not feel like a ghost anymore. Eleanor's eyes stung. She reached out, almost without thinking, and touched his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. They stood like that, two people bound by grief and hope, as the last light faded from the sky. The weeks turned into a month. Ashford became a fixture at St. Jude's, his presence no longer strange but expected. The children adored him. Mrs. Dawson called him a good man, with the kind of conviction that brooked no argument, and Eleanor found herself looking for him when he arrived each morning, found herself lingering in conversations that should have been brief, found herself dreaming of grey eyes and quiet smiles. She did not want to feel this way. It was foolish, impossible. He was a duke. She was the daughter of a ruined merchant, a woman who spent her days feeding the poor and her nights mending clothes by candlelight. There could be nothing between them. But her heart did not seem to care. One evening, after the children had been put to bed and the mission had grown quiet, Eleanor sat in the small office, tallying the week's expenses. The numbers blurred before her eyes. She rubbed her temples, exhausted. "You work too hard." She looked up. Ashford stood in the doorway, his coat slung over one arm, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked tired too, she realized, the shadows under his eyes deeper than usual. "As do you," she said. He smiled faintly. "Torche." He crossed the room and set a cup of tea on the desk beside her. She had not even heard him make it. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth. "Thank you," she murmured. Ashford pulled up a chair and sat across from her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence comfortable and charged at once. "Eleanor," he said at last, his voice careful, "I need to tell you something." Her heart stumbled. "What is it?" "I have been invited to a ball next week. A charity event hosted by the Duchess of Marlborough. She is raising funds for various causes, and I suggested St. Jude's as one of the beneficiaries." Eleanor blinked. That is wonderful. I want you to come with me." The words hung in the air. Eleanor stared at him. "What?" "As my guest," Ashford clarified. "You know the mission better than anyone. You could speak to the donors, help them understand why it matters. You would be invaluable." "I cannot." Eleanor set down the teacup, her hands shaking. "I do not belong in that world. I have no gown." "No, I will provide everything you need." "No." Eleanor stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I will not be dressed up like some doll for your amusement." Ashford rose too, his expression pained. "That is not what I meant." "Eleanor, please." "You do not understand." Her voice cracked. "I am not her. I am not my mother. I cannot be the girl you once loved, dressed in silk and standing beside you as if I belong." "I do not want you to be her," Ashford said, his voice rising. "I want you to be you." Eleanor froze. Ashford took a step closer, his eyes blazing. "I am not asking you to pretend. I am asking you to let me show the world what I see. A woman who is brave and fierce and brilliant. A woman who deserves to be seen." "Why?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Why do you care so much?" "Because Ashford stopped, his breath ragged, and then, softer, broken. "Because I am falling in love with you." The world tilted. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Ashford's face was raw, vulnerable, stripped of every mask. "I did not mean for it to happen," he continued, his voice unsteady. "But every day I see you give everything you have to people who cannot repay you. Every day I watch you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders and refuse to break. And he laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "I am undone by you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You cannot love me." "Why not?" "Because I am no one. Because you are a duke. Because you are afraid," Ashford said gently. He reached up, his hand hovering near her cheek, not quite touching. "I am afraid too, Eleanor. I am terrified, but I would rather be terrified with you than safe without you." A sob broke from her throat. She covered her mouth, shaking her head, but Ashford caught her hand, pulling it down, holding it between both of his. "You do not have to say anything," he murmured. "You do not have to feel the same. But please, come to the ball. Let me try to give you something just once." Eleanor looked at him through her tears, at the man who had returned her mother's necklace, who had saved St. Jude's, who had somehow slipped past every defense she had built. And she realized, with a terrible, breathtaking clarity, that she was already lost. "All right," she whispered. "I will come." The dressmaker arrived at St. Jude's 3 days later, a brisk woman with measuring tape and sharp eyes. Eleanor protested, mortified, but Ashford had already left instructions, and the woman would not be deterred. She pinned and tucked and murmured to herself, while Eleanor stood stiff as a board, feeling like a fraud. When the gown was finished, it took Eleanor's breath away. It was the color of midnight, deep blue silk that shimmered in the light, with delicate lace at the sleeves and a neckline that was modest but elegant. The dressmaker fastened the sapphire necklace at Eleanor's throat, and suddenly she looked like someone else, someone who belonged in ballrooms and whispered secrets. "You are beautiful, miss," the dressmaker said warmly. Eleanor barely heard her. She stared at her reflection, her heart in her throat, and thought of her mother. This was the world Margaret had once touched, the world she had left behind. And now Eleanor was stepping into it, wearing her mother's necklace, carrying her mother's courage. The night of the ball, Ashford arrived in his carriage, impeccably dressed in black and white, his expression caught somewhere between awe and terror. When Eleanor descended the steps, his breath audibly hitched. "Eleanor," he said, and her name sounded like a prayer. "Do not say anything," she said quickly, her cheeks burning. "I feel ridiculous enough as it is. You are radiant." She glared at him, but he only smiled, offering his arm. She took it, her hand trembling, and let him help her into the carriage. The Duchess of Marlborough's estate was a palace of light and music. Chandeliers glittered like stars. Women in gowns of every color swept across the marble floors. Men in tailcoats laughed and clinked glasses. Eleanor felt the weight of 100 stairs as she entered on Ashford's arm, and she wanted to flee. But Ashford's hand covered hers, steady and warm, and he leaned close to murmur, "Breathe." She did, and then she lifted her chin and walked forward. The evening was a blur of introductions and polite conversations. Ashford never left her side, his presence a shield against the whispers and curious glances. When donors asked about St. Jude's, Eleanor found her voice, speaking with quiet passion about the children, the families, the difference a small kindness could make. Several promised funds. One elderly gentleman wrote a check on the spot. But it was not the money that stayed with Eleanor. It was the way Ashford looked at her when she spoke, as if she were the most important person in the room. It was the way he introduced her, not as a charity case, not as an obligation, but as someone he admired, someone he treasured. Near midnight, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Ashford turned to her, his expression hesitant. "Will you dance with me?" Eleanor's pulse quickened. "I do not know how. I will teach you." He led her onto the floor, his hand at her waist, his other hand holding hers. The music swelled, and Eleanor, who had spent her life scrubbing floors and measuring flour, let herself be guided across a ballroom floor by a man who looked at her as if she were made of light. They moved together, slow and careful, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. Ashford's gaze never left hers. "Thank you," he said softly, "for trusting me." "I am terrified," Eleanor admitted. "So am I." "Then why are you smiling?" "Because you are here." Ashford's thumb brushed the back of her hand. "And that is enough." Something cracked open inside Eleanor, a door she had kept locked for so long she had forgotten it existed. She stepped closer just a fraction, and Ashford's breath caught. The music played on, but neither of them heard it anymore. "Adrian," she whispered, his name strange and sweet on her tongue. "Yes, I think," she swallowed hard. "I think I am falling in love with you too." Ashford stopped moving. Around them, the other dancers swirled oblivious. He stared at her, his eyes wide, disbelieving, and then he smiled, a real smile, one that transformed his face entirely. Say it again, he said, his voice rough. I love you, Eleanor repeated, and this time it came easier, truer. I do not know how it happened, but I do. Ashford pulled her closer, propriety forgotten. Eleanor Gray, he murmured, you have undone me in the best possible way. She laughed, breathless, and for the first time in years she felt something like joy. They left the ball early, slipping out into the garden where the air was cool and the stars blazed overhead. Ashford shrugged out of his coat and draped it around Eleanor's shoulders, and they walked among the roses, talking in low voices about everything and nothing, about St. Jude's and the future, about Margaret and the past, about the life they might build together if they were brave enough to try. I will not give up the mission, Eleanor said firmly. I would never ask you to, and I will not become some ornament in your house. You are no ornament, Ashford said. You are my equal, my partner, if you will have me. Eleanor stopped walking. What are you saying? Ashford turned to face her, his expression open and unguarded. I am saying that I want to marry you. I want to spend my life helping you feed the hungry, shelter the lost, and drive me to distraction with your stubbornness. I want to wake up every morning and know that you are beside me. I want... His voice broke. I want everything, Eleanor, if you will give it to me. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You are proposing here, in a garden. I can do it somewhere else if you prefer. No, she laughed, wiping her cheeks. No, this is perfect. Is that a yes? Eleanor looked at him. This man who had known her mother, who had saved her mission, who had seen her at her lowest and her highest, and loved her through all of it. She thought of the necklace at her throat, the sapphires that had travelled from her mother's hands to hers, carrying a story of love and loss and second chances. Yes, she said. Yes, Adrian, I will marry you. Ashford kissed her then, slow and tender, as if sealing a vow. Eleanor melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart soaring. The world spun on, but they stood still. Two people who had found each other against all odds, two people who refused to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Ashford rested his forehead against hers. Your mother would be proud of you, he whispered. Eleanor smiled through her tears. I think she would be proud of us both. They returned to St. Jude's the next morning, hand in hand, and the children erupted in cheers when they saw them. Little Meg threw her arms around Eleanor's waist, her fever finally broken, her laughter bright. Mrs. Dawson clapped her hands and declared that a wedding would be the best thing for everyone. Tom grinned and asked if he could be a groomsman. And Eleanor, standing in the mission that had become her home, surrounded by the people she loved, with Adrian's hand warm in hers, felt something she had not felt in years. She felt whole. The wedding took place 3 months later in a small chapel near St. Jude's, the pews filled with dukes and dustmen alike. Eleanor wore her mother's necklace and a simple white gown, and when she walked down the aisle, Adrian's eyes filled with tears. They spoke their vows in voices that shook with emotion, promising to love and honor and build a life together, one day at a time. And when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian cupped Eleanor's face in his hands and kissed her as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. Because to him, she was. They honeymooned in the countryside, in a cottage overlooking the sea, but they returned to London within a fortnight, eager to get back to work. St. Jude's expanded under their joint efforts, becoming not just a mission but a refuge, a place where the broken could be mended and the lost could be found. Adrian used his title and influence to lobby for better housing laws, for education reforms, for a world where poverty was not a prison sentence. And Eleanor stood beside him every step, her voice clear and unafraid, her compassion a force that moved mountains. Years later, when little Meg grew up and became a teacher, when Tom opened his own carpentry shop, when Mrs. Dawson passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the family who loved her, Eleanor and Adrian would sit together in the mission's courtyard and they would remember the night Eleanor sold her mother's necklace, the night Adrian saw her for the first time, the night two people who should never have met found each other in the most unlikely of places. Eleanor, her hair silver now, the necklace still at her throat, would lean her head on Adrian's shoulder and whisper, "Thank you." "For what?" Adrian would ask, his voice as gentle as ever. "For seeing me." Adrian would kiss her temple, his arm tightening around her. "How could I not? You are the light of my life." And in the courtyard of St. Jude's, beneath the stars that had once witnessed a young vicar's daughter and a duke fall in love, their legacy lived on, a legacy of second chances, of courage, of a necklace that had travelled across time to bring two hearts together. Eleanor Gray, who had once sold everything to save strangers, had gained a love that saved her in return, and in the end, that was the greatest treasure of all. The story of the necklace did not end with their wedding day. It became something larger, something that rippled through the lives of everyone it touched. On Eleanor's 30th birthday, Adrian surprised her with a portrait, a painting of her mother, young and radiant, wearing the sapphire necklace, her eyes full of the same kindness Eleanor had inherited. The artist had worked from an old sketch Adrian had kept hidden for decades, a drawing he had made of Margaret that summer so long ago. Eleanor wept when she saw it. She touched the painted face, tracing the curve of her mother's smile, and felt the years collapse. "She was beautiful," Eleanor whispered. "She was," Adrian agreed, his hand on her shoulder. "But you are her masterpiece." They hung the portrait in the main hall of St. Jude's, where it watched over the children and the volunteers, a silent guardian and a reminder that love never truly dies. It simply changes form, passing from one generation to the next, like a flame carried through the dark. Tom, who had become a skilled craftsman, built a glass case for the necklace, and Eleanor placed it there beneath her mother's portrait. It was no longer something to be worn or sold. It was history. It was memory. It was proof that even the smallest act of kindness could change the course of a life. Visitors to St. Jude's would stop before the case, reading the plaque Adrian had commissioned, in honor of Margaret Gray, who taught her daughter that love is the greatest wealth, and in honor of Eleanor Harcourt, who gave everything to save those who had nothing. One winter evening, years after their wedding, a young girl came to St. Jude's with her mother, both of them hungry and desperate. Eleanor greeted them at the door, her hair now streaked with white, her face lined but still beautiful. She led them inside, gave them soup and bread, and wrapped the child in a warm blanket. As the girl ate, her eyes drifted to the portrait on the wall, and then to the necklace in its case. "It is so pretty," the girl said softly. Eleanor knelt beside her, smiling. "It is. But do you know what makes it truly special?" The girl shook her head. "It was given in love, sold for compassion, and returned with forgiveness," Eleanor said. "And now it reminds us that the things we give away often come back to us in ways we never expect." The girl considered this, her young face serious. "Did you give it away?" "I did," Eleanor said, "and I got something far better in return." "What?" Eleanor glanced at Adrian, who stood across the room speaking with the girl's mother, his presence as steady and sure as it had been on the day they met. "Hope," Eleanor said, "and love, and a life full of purpose." The girl smiled, comforted, and returned to her soup. Eleanor stood and walked to Adrian's side. He reached for her hand without looking, their fingers intertwining in the easy way of people who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger. "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked quietly. Eleanor looked around the mission, at the children playing in the corner. at the volunteers bustling in the kitchen, at the portrait of her mother watching over it all. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive." Adrian smiled. "I would argue that I am the lucky one. We can both be right." He laughed, the sound warm and rich, and pulled her close. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, two people who had turned loss into legacy. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the city in white. Inside St. Jude's, the fires burned bright, the laughter rang loud, and the necklace in its glass case caught the light, its sapphires gleaming like stars. And somewhere, perhaps, Margaret Grey was smiling. Eleanor had sold her mother's necklace to feed the poor, never knowing it belonged to the Duke watching her. But in the end, the necklace had done more than save the hungry. It had led her to love. It had led her to Adrian. It had led her to a life where every day was a choice to give, to forgive, to believe that broken things could be made whole again. And as Eleanor rested her head on Adrian's shoulder, listening to the sound of children singing a carol in the next room, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for the necklace, for the man beside her, for the mother who had given her everything, even from beyond the grave. "I love you," Adrian murmured into her hair. "I love you more," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but sure. And in that moment, beneath the portrait of a woman who had loved a duke and been loved in return, Eleanor knew with perfect certainty that some stories never end. They simply grow, spreading like roots through the soil, blooming in unexpected places, carrying light into the darkest corners of the world. The necklace had been a gift, then a sacrifice, then a miracle. But most of all, it had been a promise that love, once given, never truly disappears. It only waits to be found again.